Okay, so you're one of the cool kids out there playing Dead Cells, and you've done a few runs, maybe even a lot of runs, but you always get to the last boss and you die. Or maybe you die before the last boss. Either way, it takes a long time to get to the ending of the game, so each attempt is a long time investment, and you want to make sure that you're in the best spot possible when you get there, so you have the best chance at beating the game. So let me give you some of the tips and tricks that have helped me beat the game several times. I'll give you some of my strategies and some of the mindset that I have that will help you get to a more consistent win rate when it comes to Dead Cells runs. Let's go. Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Johnny, and I'm doing a series where each week I talk about one of my favorite games and discuss why it struck a note with me, celebrate the creator's work, and put out some much needed positivity in the gaming scene. So today, we're talking about Dead Cells, and it's one of my favorite roguelite games, so I'm giving you some of my best tips and strategies to get consistent wins in the game. Let's get into it. So let's look at a slightly older run that I have, which I think is a good example of some of the things I want to talk to you about. Basically, what I want to say is how to approach certain things in the game, certain moments in the game that I think are kind of pivotal to your success, to have successful runs. And it doesn't really matter what build you're going for. In this particular run, we have a fire build, essentially. So we're going for brutality as our main stat, and we have the combination of fire grenades and the oil sword, which of course boosts the fire damage overall. And then we have the shield for some extra survivability. The bear trap is not really doing a ton for us. It's just a little bit of extra damage and control that we have. So really what I want to talk to you about when it comes to early game, we're not seeing it here because I think it's, the early game everybody knows and has done a ton of times, so we're skipping ahead a bit. But on the very early game, I just want to mention, you really want to try to get through it as quickly as you can. Specifically, there's timed doors that early on really make a big difference if you're able to grab them. So really don't spend time, my personal recommendation is don't spend too much time killing every enemy in the levels. Aim for the timed doors, especially on the first two levels. I think you always want to grab those. After, arguably you want to continue to grab them, but it becomes a bit of a trade-off at that point. Whereas in later levels, it does make sense to kill more enemies and make sure that you get everything from the levels when it comes to the gear that's lying around and all of that. Earlier levels really don't have much for you that's consequential in terms of weapons and gear. So really, those early levels, prioritize the time doors. That's kind of my biggest recommendation for you. So the next thing to talk about is mutations. The one I grab is the one at the very bottom that gives you a revive, essentially. So if you die, you come back. That I always grab that, basically. I think that's really, really hard to beat, and you can only grab it as your first mutation. It's no longer available after, so make sure you grab that. When it comes to the other stuff, it will depend on what you have unlocked. And I've found that if you do have points in survival, it does help to get survival-based mutations when it comes to boosting your HP overall. Remember that percentages apply, or I guess come into fruition in a big way towards the end of your run. So 10% bonus HP may not seem like a lot early on, but when you get to the end of your run, and you have something like, 5,000 HP or whatever it is, of course, that's going to make a big, big difference. So those are the kind of small things that I look at, when it comes to slowly building into your end stage here. But overall, when it comes to stats, in this case, we're prioritizing brutality, but you could just do the same thing with skills. You could just have your damage come from skills, and in some ways, that is an easier or safer approach because most skills you kind of activate and forget. You don't really have to be in close proximity. You don't really have to hit people necessarily with any accuracy. You kind of toss your skills, and whenever they're off cooldown again, you spam them yet again. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing skill runs. It doesn't mean that it doesn't require any skill from you, but it does mean that you can play in a different way where you don't have to be in harm's way as much as if you have a sword as a primary weapon, let's say. Of course, you could also have a bow, for example, which typically those scale with your purple stat too. So that kind of works out too. If you have something like freezing and the bow, that's another really, potentially very strong combination. You could have your bow do bonus damage on frozen targets, for example, or poison, right? You could also go into bleed builds. There's really a lot of options. The only thing I would say is try to solidify your run into one central aspect, one synergy, one main synergy. In our case here, what I found is fire. So the idea of boosting my fire damage as much as possible. Of course, the main way we're doing it, as we discussed, is the oiled sword that, just boosts that damage overall. But throughout the run, we're just going to try to enhance that effect and find as many things that can build into that as possible. And so the idea is that gradually you're going down this path, down this archetype of your run, and we've at this point found the identity of the run, as I like to say. That's always the kind of the first thing that I'm looking for when it comes to mid-game. Hello, Basil. How you doing, buddy? So after that point, the only thing that I concern myself with is to make sure that I get everything in these mid to late game levels. For example, this level here, the Stilt, is a level that has a ton of stuff. If you really go through all the huts and everything, you can get some really good gear that will actually carry you through the run. You do have to upgrade your weapons if you grab them at this point early on. But remember that you can do so. Basil, don't climb on me. What are you doing, buddy? It's not cool. Remember to keep your gear upgraded. We'll see later on how we do that. Don't give the ass to the camera, please, sir. Cooperate, my cat. Sorry about that, guys. But yes, the idea is that you don't only want to upgrade for the sake of upgrading, but you want to be deliberate about what you want from it. Like I was saying, what's the identity of your run? If it is just amplifying fire damage, then look for upgrades that synergize with that, whether it's just raising your raw damage in your sword or making it, compound with fire damage in some way. Look for skills that also elevate your gameplay. Examples, if your main thing is doing fire damage, you may lack control when it comes to stunning or freezing enemies, just controlling enemies in general. So maybe find a solution for that. In our case, we have the bear trap, which helps a little bit with locking people down. It's really not a 10 out of 10 option, and I think we come across something a lot better later on. But it does do good damage, and again, when we upgrade it, we are looking for upgrades that synergize with fire overall. So the next thing that may be keeping you back is the order of execution of your skills, okay? You may be taking chip damage throughout levels because of how you're initiating combats on each different pod or platform here. So one thing that I always like to do as my template for fights when I'm climbing towers like this is always have some kind of initiation tool. We talked about control, right? The bear trap was before what we had. Now we have something a little better, which is an ice grenade. Now, a big AoE effect kind of freezes everything in place and people can't attack you. So what I do here, and you'll see this applied in practice, is when I jump into a new pod, I straight away open with the ice grenade, right? Freezes everybody. It buys me a little time for me to get my stuff out, fire grenade, all of that, do damage, and then get out, right? And normally I always wait until the ice grenade is off cooldown to initiate again on a new pod or new platform. And this kind of reduces the amount of chip damage you take throughout the level. Now, this may seem like a small thing, but if you're taking damage on every single pod, even if it's a little bit, it builds up, right? And especially in later levels, this will add up and really will cost you runs, right? Not to talk about New Game Plus. So when you beat the boss, you can do New Game Plus runs, which get incrementally harder. One of the ways in which they get harder is that you don't get as many heals. You don't replenish your heals as often. So it's really, really critical to get into this mindset of avoiding damage. And one of the big ways we do it is having good initiation that stops or locks enemies in place. The other thing to think about is the shield option, which has, damage reduction. Anything in general that has damage reduction is going to be a big deal for us. Of course, like we talked about, percentages are a big thing here, right? So whenever you see 15% damage reduction or projectile reduction, something like that, those are things that are going to be really, really attractive for us in the run, and we're going to try to grab as many of them as we can. Now, another element, of course, is bosses, and some bosses are going to be a little bit tricky. You're going to have to kind of learn their patterns, okay? You're going to have to learn some of the attacks. There isn't really one thing that I can teach you for every boss, and I don't necessarily want to spoil or show every boss here, but this is one of the bosses that really, it was very tricky for me at first, okay? The main things that I think about when it comes to bosses like this is locating the attacks that I can roll through in a safe way, and attacks that are just totally unsafe and I need to find something else, like jumping out of, I need to physically be out of the way, okay? This guy happens to have most of his attacks able to be dodged if you roll through them at the right time. So you can see right there, we timed the roll with that chain and it didn't hit us. Now we're still getting hit plenty by the shurikens and small attacks like that, but I'm always prioritizing. My mind is really just focusing on those big attacks that lock you down and do a bunch of damage. Those I'm prioritizing evading. And you can see just the burn damage is destroying this guy, okay? Now this, in this second phase here where he starts dropping these things, really it's just more distraction stuff. I continue at this point to focus on that chain attack that locks you down and does a ton of damage. You can see there, he does it now more often. It doesn't really matter, right? I still just time it and roll through it. I miss it in that occasion, but you can see me roll through it several times here. And really that's the main attack that I focus on. So every boss has one or two attacks that you definitely have to dodge. Otherwise, it's highly punishing, right? Most of the other attacks often are okay to tank, let's say. So you don't really have to dodge everything, but you have to identify that one or two key attacks that you have to focus on and then learn them well, whether it's dodging through them or jumping out of the way. That's kind of my recommendation in general for bosses. Now we jump ahead a little bit into the level of Castle, which is the level before the final boss. And in this one, you have kind of mini bosses that you face, like the one we just saw here. And one thing that's kind of critical when it comes to those mini bosses is timing of things. So if you find yourself getting hit by the first hit in a combo, you're likely going to get hit by all three. So it's very, very critical for you to keep track of the attack when it comes in, roll through it to get that invulnerability in the roll, and then you're going to be in good shape to dodge the rest. But I always look for that first attack in the combo and pay a lot of attention to that. If you do get hit the first time, very important to not panic smash the roll button, because a lot of times those attacks are programmed in a way that if you are spamming the roll, after getting hit the first time, you're just going to get hit by the other attacks because of the timing of them, okay? So a lot of times you need to keep your cool. It's like, okay, I took a hit, right? Look at the next attack coming. Often you need to wait a little bit to dodge instead of just spamming that dodge button. So that kind of knee-jerk reaction of spamming the dodge is something that I kind of fought back, and it really helped me when I reined it in a little bit and kept watching for the attack. Even if you get hit, try to keep watching for what the enemy is doing. And obviously it's a process. It will take some time, but you will get to know what attacks are really important to dodge, the ones that really hurt you, obviously, right? After a few runs, you'd get a feeling for, okay, this particular enemy has that attack that I need to watch out for. And that's like knowledge you build over time. So don't worry too much if you don't have it right now. Just be aware that it is important to find those key attacks to identify and to watch out for. Again, not critical to dodge every attack from enemies, but critical to find those really, really important ones for us to focus on. So now we move to the final boss of the game, and I just want to give you some general tips on how to approach this guy, because likely it will take you about an hour to get here, or maybe 40 minutes to get to the end of the run. So to even attempt this boss several times, it's a high amount of time that you have to expend. So I just want to give you some of the tips that kind of have helped me in the past. Now take a look at the arena, okay? You have two small ice platforms. Those are going to be really, really useful for you. When you step on them, they go away temporarily after a bit, so watch out for that. But those are going to be a respite from the ground attacks of the boss. Several attacks from him, you're not going to be able to just dodge through because they kind of cover the entire floor, or he slides covering the entire arena in some way. So those small platforms are going to help you in a big way. Make sure you make strategical use of them, okay? Now, when it comes to overall his attacks, when he places those banners, you want to kill them straight away, okay, with your attacks. Second, really, really important thing is when he signals that slide attack that you saw a second ago there, you want to make sure you have somewhere to jump to. You're not going to be able to roll through that. So when you see that kind of energy shield be placed before his face, you know he's going to slide into you and he's going to drag you into the spikes at the end. It's going to hurt real bad, right? The spikes really, really hurt. So that's the main thing you want to watch out for. You want to make sure you have access to one of those ice platforms for when he does that. The other thing that he does that you saw earlier is that kind of slam attack, okay, on the ground. You can jump and dodge that, but again, the ice platforms really, really help, are kind of a safe way to avoid that overall. The other thing that he does as well is he summons a platform where elite enemies spawn. So there, the difficulty is going to be handling the numbers. And this comes back to what we talked about earlier, which is having some kind of crowd control, which will come into play here. You'll see we have a lot of ice that we use for crowd control. The frostbite is basically my favorite weapon. It provides just unlimited control when it comes to enemies. It doesn't really do a ton of damage, but the control you get out of it is really quite insane. So you can see we're continuing to use the same weapons we had, which is essentially the fire grenade combined with the oiled sword, and we just have a bunch of ice for area control, which really works quite nicely here. So in this phase where you're just facing off against the elites, this is kind of the easy mode phase, as much as it may not seem so. You just need some kind of good crowd control to handle several enemies at a time. Aside from that, it's really keep going. Keep your distance when he does those balls of energy. They're pretty annoying and hard to avoid, really. And a lot of times you want to keep your distance from him as much as possible if your build doesn't require you to be just, bang on his face. And the key thing to avoid, if you take anything away from this, is avoid getting dragged into the spikes. By far, the thing that's going to do the most damage is falling into the spikes. If he catches you with that drag, really, there's a very, very high chance you're going to hit the spikes. You're not going to be able to jump out before you hit them. So that's kind of the biggest thing for me. You can see this is so close, guys. Okay, we have no heals left, and our HP is like 1% or, under 1% here. Now, the death cheated kicks in. This is the mutation that we talked about early on that I said I always pick up for good reason, okay? We would have died there. We would have lost the run, and instead, we're barely, ever so close, but we're going to make it. We're going to make it. Very clutch dodges. You can see you can actually dodge through the dash he does if you time it correctly, guys. But it's really difficult to get that timing. So for me, the reliable strat is to just jump onto the ice platforms. And that's it, okay? At this point, you get the boss cell, and that allows you to do New Game Plus shenanigans, better gear, access to better weapons at the cost of higher difficulty. Very cool stuff. So hopefully, those are some tips that will help you take your game to the next level. Hey, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, question of the day for you. What's your favorite Dead Cells build that has given you the most wins? Hit me up in the comments down below. I want to hear from you. Remember, I'm live on Twitch Monday, Wednesday, and Saturdays, so you can get much more content from me over there. Perhaps consider joining our wonderful Discord where we chat every day, guys. And as always, we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.